Everyone in the audience and those at home watching the meeting on TV or on the internet, thank you so much for joining us this evening. Madam Clerk, roll call, please.
Ms. Dembowski? Present. Mr. Croft?
He's around.
Mr. Evans?
Here.
Mr. Flynn?
Present.
Ms. Gray Jackson?
Honored to be here.
Mr. Trainee?
Present.
Mr. Steele?
Here.
Mr. Peterson?
Present.
Mr. Starr? Mr. Dunbar?
Here.
Mr. Weddleton?
Here.
Madam Chair, you have a quorum.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Ms. Foley, would you come to the podium and lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, please? No.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor?
Nothing, Madam Chair.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. I skipped something. But anyway, Mr. Mayor.
I thought so. That's why I was confused.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Minutes of previous meeting. Mr. Trainee, can I have a motion to approve both sets of minutes?
Move to approve the minutes and to incorporate the addendum to the agenda and laid on table items, Madam Chair.
We're going to do the minutes first, Mr. Trainee.
Well, I'm talking to Starr, so I'm trying to get it there.
Thank you. Can I have a second, please? Thank you. Ask unanimous consent to approve the two sets of minutes before us. Seeing no objection, those minutes are approved. Chair's report.
I just hit the mayor's report.
Mr. Mayor,
Well, I still have nothing to report, Madam Chair.
that's why I didn't call on you again.
Thank
you, Mr. Flynn. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. All right. The Budget and Finance Committee had a special meeting held on Friday, March 3rd, and the reason for the meeting was in order for us to receive an update on the SAP project budget and finance requirements through the completion, and we also wanted to get a report from the OMB director on the function and application of the spending limitation. The following information was provided in regard to SAP. When the administration took over the project, approximately $40 million had been previously spent, although the original estimate in 2011 was $9.6 million. The current administration is committed and has been to completing the project by this summer. There are currently 100 consultants and 20 to 30 core municipal employees that are working on the project. On March 14th, the SIT Phase 2 testing is going to begin, and employee training is scheduled to begin soon also. We have a resolution on the agenda this evening for introduction, which will appropriate an additional $4.5 million for the project. The resolution also addresses the funding mechanism for this additional money. In addition to the $4.5 million appropriation request, the project has also received $6.3 million in concessions from SAP. The committee also received an overview from the OMB director on the spending limitation, and suggestions and ideas were discussed. The spending limitation should be a tool to manage our budget. When calculating the spending limitation, we need to take into consideration the municipality is growing, it's expanding, and it's maturing. And we also need to take in consideration that any emergency spending, it would immediately exceed the spending limit. The medical CPI significantly influences the increase in the budget, but it's not currently factored into the spending limitation. Further discussion is going to take place at future Budget and Finance Committee meetings so that we can determine whether or not to include the medical CPI and other matters such as judgments and settlements, and also limited service areas. Our next regular meeting is scheduled for March 16th from 12 to 1, City Hall and Assembly Conference Room 155. Committee reports. I will start with Mr. Weddleton.
Nothing to report.
Thank you, Mr. Weddleton. Mr. Dunbar.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The Transportation Committee will be meeting at 12:30 on Wednesday, March 15th in room 155 of City Hall. We'll be discussing the TNC ordinance, and I'd urge my colleagues to please, if you are interested in amending that ordinance, if we could use that time to discuss said amendments. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dunbar. Mr. Peterson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We had a grand opening ribbon-cutting ceremony on the 2nd
at our new elections center down on 619 Ship Creek Avenue. And there were, I don't know, 75, 80 people there. It was quite an event. The room has made quite some improvements since we first looked at it last summer. And there's some additional improvements that are going to be made and some equipment that will be delivered here in the next couple months. But it was great to officially have the ribbon cutting of our new election center, and they will be using it for the election this spring as well.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. Mr. Steele?
No report, Madam.
Thank you, Mr. Steele. Mr. Trainee?
Nothing, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Trainee. Mr. Flynn?
Thank you, Madam Chair. The AMATS Policy Committee will not meet this month because there are no action items to be taken. However, given the impending transition, I would respectfully request that you officially remove me as a member of the Policy Committee and replace me with Mr. Weddleton, who has been our able alternate for the past year. I'll happily serve as the alternate, but by the time they meet next, I will no longer be a member of the body, and I think it appropriate that Mr. Weddleton have that role officially, so that as the leadership transitions, if there is not prompt naming of a new member, we are fully staffed with Mr. Peterson and Mr. Weddleton in place.
Thank you. Mr. Flynn, did you just ask for that change to happen immediately?
Well, you got to authorize it, Madam Chair.
No, I know that,
Whenever you're
but
ready, yes.
I got lost in a minute. Okay, consider it done. Mr. Evans?
No report.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. Mr. Croft?
No report.
Thank you, Mr. Croft. Ms. Dombrowski?
No report. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Dombrowski. Mr. Starr?
No, nothing.
Thank you, Mr. Starr. Mr. Trainee, can I have a motion to incorporate the laid on the table items and the addendum to the agenda?
Move to incorporate the laid on the table items, the agenda,
I'm going to miss that.
and the, to the,
Addendum and,
yes, working on stars, sorry.
that's okay, thank
the
you.
agenda.
Thank you.
Incorporate 'em.
Can we have a second, please? Thank you. Ask unanimous consent to incorporate. I see no objections. Those items are incorporated. Addendum to the agenda. 9F15, AR 2017-94, a resolution of the Municipality of Anchorage approving a master tax exempt lease purchase agreement loan and appropriating an amount not to exceed $4,500,000 to the Information Technology Fund 607 and appropriation of those funds to the Capital Improvement Fund 608 for SAP implementation. Laid on the table items. 9A2, AR 2017-95, a resolution of the Anchorage Municipal Assembly recognizing March 2017 as National Women's History Month. Item 9A3, AR 2017, resolution of the Anchorage Municipal Assembly recognizing and honoring Erica B. McConnell for her 14 years of excellent public service to the municipality of Anchorage. Mr. Trainee, can I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
Move to approve the consent agenda.
May I have a second, please? And please, folks, remember to touch the screen because it's really helpful to our clerk when you do that. Thank you very much. Now we'll go to see if anyone wants to pull any items off the consent agenda, and I'll start with you, Ms. Dombrowski.
9 Alpha 2 for reading.
On the addendum. Thank you, Ms. Dombrowski. Mr. Croft.
Nothing to pull, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Croft. Mr. Evans.
No items.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. Mr. Flynn.
9 Delta 2 conflict.
9D2. Thank you, Mr. Flynn. Mr. Trainee.
Nothing, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Trainee. Mr. Steele.
No items, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Steele. Mr. Peterson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. No items this evening.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. Mr. Dunbar.
No items, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Dunbar. Mr. Weddleton.
9D13, and I guess 9A, which is the,
9A1.
I suppose 1, but 3.
Can you repeat those, please?
9A3,
9A3.
9 Delta 13.
9A3 on the addendum. And 9 Delta 13.
correct.
Thank you, Mr. Weddleton. Mr. Starr.
No items.
Thank you, Mr. Starr.
No one pulled 9 out.
Let's vote on the remaining items on the,
Madam Chair,
Mr. Dunbar.
did anyone pull 9 Alpha 1?
Doesn't look like it. Would you?
I'll pull that for reading.
Thank you, Mr. Dunbar. Okay. Before we approve the consent agenda, I'm going to go over what's been pulled. 9 Alpha 1 on the addendum, 9 Alpha 2, 9 Alpha 3. On the regular agenda, 9D2 and 9D13. Let's vote on the remaining items. The board, please.
Mr. Starr first.
Mr. Starr, please vote. Mr. Starr?
Yes.
We need to vote. Give us a moment, folks. We're having a little bit of an issue here. Okay, please vote. Those items are approved. We are now at agenda item 9A1, AR 2017-93, recognizing and honoring Linda Davidovics for her 14 years of excellent public service with the municipality of Anchorage. Mr. Dunbar. Move to approve.
Move to approve.
Thank you.
Second.
Thank you. Ask unanimous consent. Seeing no objection, this resolution is approved. I'm going to present.
Are you reading? Do you want to read? Okay.
A resolution of the Anchorage Municipal Assembly recognizing and honoring Linda Davidovics for her 14 years of excellent public service with the municipality of Anchorage. Whereas Linda Davidovich began her service with the municipality of Anchorage in 2002 as the executive assistant to ML&P General Manager for Municipal Light and Power. And whereas Linda's public service career has spanned and survived the administration of 5 ML&P General Managers, Mike Scott, James Posey, Dan Kendall, Jim Trent, and Mark Johnston. And whereas Linda worked closely with the ML&P commissioners, with division managers, employees, ML&P customers, and local utilities. And whereas Linda's professional experience includes working with the board of directors of the Maniliac Association of Kotzebue, Nano Development Corporation, and the Municipality of Anchorage ML&P, and assisting in forming the American Red Cross chapters in rural Alaska. And whereas after 14 years of serving in the Municipality of Anchorage, Linda Davidovics retires on March 10, 2017. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the Anchorage Assembly recognizes and honors Linda Davidovics for her dedication to the Municipality of Anchorage and its citizens, passed and approved by the Anchorage Assembly this 7th day of March, 2017.
First of all, I'd like to thank Madam Chair L.B. Gray Jackson for thinking about putting this resolution together for me. L.B., I really appreciate this. I worked with L.B., and it's been an honor to work for the municipality of Anchorage and for Municipal Light and Power. We have a wonderful group of people that work at ML&P, and I really appreciate what the Assembly does for Municipal Light and Power. Your support is really greatly appreciated. And I know the work that has to be done.
Telephone problem.
I know the work that has to be done in the General Manager's office, as I've worked with Mr. Posey, and now I work with Mark Johnston, Mr. Johnson, and it is an experience to work with the general managers. But I want to tell you that, I really appreciate this honor. It is an honor for me. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And I have my grandchildren here today with me, too. So that's who I'll be spending my time with, my quality time with my grandchildren when I retire.
Linda, you were one of the best, and thank you so much for your service to not only MLMP, but the citizens of our community. You have a good retirement. I'm sure I'll see you around.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
We are now at Agenda Item 9A2, AR 2017-95, a resolution recognizing March 2017 as National Women's History Month. Ms. Domboski?
Move to approve.
Thank you. I ask unanimous consent. Mr. Starr?
He's not online.
He's not online. Okay, thank you. Seeing no objection, this resolution is approved. We have someone to receive the resolution here this evening. Great.
All right. I was asked to read this one. A resolution of the Anchorage Municipal Assembly recognizing March 2017 as National Women's History Month. Whereas the purpose of National Women's History Month is to promote knowledge of the contributions of women to our nation's history, and whereas although the contributions of American women of every race, class, and ethnic background are woven throughout the fundamental fabric of our collective history, the role of American women has traditionally been overlooked and undervalued in the telling of that history. And whereas American women have made historic contributions to the growth and strength of our nation and continue to play critical economic, cultural, and social roles as a significant portion of the labor force working inside and outside of the home. And whereas the theme for National Women's History Month 2017, honoring trailblazing women in labor and business, honors women who have successfully challenged the role of women in both the paid labor force and business by defying the social mores of their times and succeeded in expanding women's power in the paid labor force and their participation in commerce while facing stark inequalities in the workplace, including lower wages, poor working conditions, and limited opportunities. And whereas the Alaska Women's Hall of Fame, an organization dedicated to honoring women whose contributions have influenced the direction of Alaska, will host an induction ceremony for its class of 2017 on May 4th, 2017. And whereas the Athena Society, a program of the Anchorage Chamber of Commerce dedicated to encouraging the potential of all women as valued members and leaders of the business community, will induct new members and present the 2017 Athena Leadership Award at a luncheon on March 20th, 2017 at the Denina Center. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the Anchorage Assembly recognizes March 2017 as National Women's History Month, passed and approved by the Anchorage Assembly the 7th day of March 2017.
Madam Chair, my name is Anita Halterman. I am a representative of the Anchorage Women's Commission. This is one of my new co-chairs, and I'll let her introduce herself.
I'm Commissioner Carolyn Hall.
She just joined our commission. It is an honor and a privilege to stand here in front of all of you and accept this recognition on behalf of the Anchorage Women's Commission and on behalf of all women in the city of Anchorage. Our commission does serve at the leisure of the mayor to advise the Assembly and the mayor on women's issues. And so it is a great honor to stand here in front of you, and I thank you for this recognition. Thank you.
Thank you very much for being here, especially on such short notice. We appreciate all that you do on behalf of our community. Thank you. You're welcome. We are now at Agenda Item 9A3, AR 2017-97, a resolution of the Anchorage Municipal Assembly recognizing and honoring Erica B. McConnell for her 14 years of excellent public service. Mr. Weddleton.
Move to approve.
Ask unanimous consent. Seeing no objection, this resolution is approved. I apologize for the delay. I'm looking for someone to read, and I'm the one who's supposed to be reading this. Hello. AR 2017-95, a resolution AR 2017-97, a resolution of the Anchorage Municipal Assembly recognizing and honoring Erica B. McConnell for her 14 years of excellent public service to the municipality of Anchorage. Whereas Erica McConnell has diligently and professionally served the municipality of Anchorage since January 2, 2003, when she began her service in the planning department as an associate planner in the Physical Planning Division, and soon became a senior planner within the division. And whereas Erica worked in 3 divisions of the Planning Department, from Physical Planning in 2003 to Transportation Planning Division in 2011, and finally to current planning as Planning Manager in 2012. And whereas for the past 13 months, Erica has served in the Office of Economic and Community Development as the leader on marijuana land use policies, in a position the Alaska Journal of Commerce called Anchorage's Marijuana Whip, and members of the public called Anchorage's Marijuana Czar. And whereas Erica is an example of what a public servant should be, as shown by her work ethic, strong planning ethics, loyalty, and help in assisting customers, co-workers, and the general public at large. And whereas Erica's dedication to creating a better community is exceptional, her 14 years of municipal knowledge and planning expertise will be difficult to replace, and she will be missed by all who know and have worked with her. Now, therefore, the Anchorage Assembly hereby recognizes and honors Erica B. McConnell for her dedication to the municipality of Anchorage and its citizens, passed and approved by the Anchorage Assembly the 7th day of March, 2017.
Thank you so much for those kind words. It's very bittersweet to leave the municipality. My time here has been really precious. It's been an honor and a privilege to serve the people of Anchorage, to work with the Assembly, to work with the administration. So it's hard to go, and I just want to say thank you to the mayor and the staff. And thank you to all of you. I'm going to miss everybody very much.
Don't go away, Erica. Sorry. Don't worry. I'll be crying with you in a minute, so it's all good. Mr. Flynn?
I remember when, Erica. We were young. We were staffers long before your service on the Assembly or on the with the city, and you've come so far and done a lot. And for good or for ill, it looks like our paths are going to keep crossing as the world moves forward. But congratulations on an outstanding career. Thank you for all you've done. And I will note that this resolution is incomplete. It does not, I think, do sufficient credit to the immense amounts of work you did in Title 21. I suspect Ms. Domboski is going to expand on that topic in a moment here. But thank you so much for that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Flynn. Ms. Domboski?
Thank you. You know, I kind of laughed when I heard Patrick talking because he talked about how much you guys have grown as you've navigated the municipal system. But what struck me is how much I've grown just by you teaching me. You know, from when I came in, I knew nothing about land use or planning. And you took this girl from Chugach and you taught her Title 21, at least what questions to ask. And the thing I've always just been so grateful for is no matter how stupid my question may seem, you always explained it, and you explained it and you put it in context. But whenever we debated land use issues or what the purpose of them were, you always came back to the community. And what did the community want? What did the public expect? How are we going to protect certain elements of the public? And I think that's what a public servant is. And you exude that. And I can't even begin to put into words how much you have taught me and how grateful I will always be for that. I will miss you dearly.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Domboski. Mr. Weddleton?
Boy, I saw this coming when I saw the ad for, saw that Cynthia was resigning. It was, you know, I don't know how long I've worked with Erica on Title 21 stuff, since the early days when I was a community council guy and they were starting to rewrite this thing and I was trying to figure out what the heck Title 21 meant. And then when I was on the Planning Commission and dove in even deeper in the years after that, kind of keeping my hands in it. And it's always just been wonderful to know I could call Erica and count on a good, straight answer that was just tremendous. I'm going to really miss you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Weddleton. Mr. Trainee.
Eric, I've known you for quite a while, and you're the best we have, so I'm impressed the state picked you up because that'll help them get over their problems. I remember when we first started getting marijuana here, we sent you down to Colorado to find out how they did it down there, and you've been invaluable trying to put this system together. Thank you very much, ma'am.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Trainee. Mr. Peterson.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair, and I feel like we're losing a member of the first team tonight. Anytime we had questions, whether it was the Title 21 committee or the marijuana committee, or whether it was about cell towers, we would always go to Erica, and she'd help us figure it out. And it's just been great working with you. There's no way that we can replace you. Maybe a half a dozen people over with 10 or 12 years practice might be able to replace you. But good luck in the future. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. Mr. Steele.
Erica, as a relatively new member on the Assembly, I was duly impressed with your knowledge across the board and the experience that you've had in the different components of planning show in your judgment and your knowledge. And personally, I think it's a great loss to the city. We need somebody good on the marijuana board, but losing you is going to cost us. And good luck, and go forth and do good.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Steele. Mr. Evans.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I often get asked what's been really surprising that I've learned being on the Assembly. And one of my answers is always how many really smart, competent people are in positions within the administration. And when I say that, generally I'm thinking about you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. Erica, I'm really happy that my colleagues said all the things that I wanted to say, so now I don't have to sit here and start boo-hooing. So I'm just going to sum it up in 4 words. You are simply amazing.
Thank you.
We are now at agenda item 9D2, Assembly Memorandum 192, 2017, 2018 liquor licenses renewals. Mr. Flynn.
I can't make the motion, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Flynn. Can somebody make a motion? Thank you. In a second. Okay, thank you. Mr. Flynn.
Yeah, Madam Chair, I have a financial interest in one of these licenses.
Thank you, Mr. Flynn. The chair rules that you're excused. Thank you. There's no one else in the queue. Please vote on agenda item 9D2. Mr. Weddleton? Thank you. That item is approved. We are now at agenda item 9D13, AM 217, 2017, consideration of the arbitrator's decision regarding negotiations between Municipality of Anchorage and the Plumbers and Pipe Fitters Local 367. Mr. Weddleton.
Move to approve.
Second.
Thank you. Mr. Weddleton.
Well, this is a tough one here. First time I guess for many of us have dealt with something like this, but having read it, I urge a no vote to not accept the arbitrator's decision. I just look at this. The Assembly does have some active recommendation on these contracts, and it goes back to, I think, 2010 or 2011, and basically said keep things down to at least the rate of inflation. And I actually think that's pretty generous to do that, because we have a whole new world now with the state economy. Many economists won't say it, but I say it's tanking, and we have several more years of this. Everybody's fairly certain. And I think we'll hit a point where to get a raise isn't the exciting thing. Just to be able to keep your job is the exciting thing. And to have a good, solid municipal job in an organization that is well run as the Anchorage Wastewater Utility is a good thing that people should value. And going through the the paperwork here and the discussion from the arbitrator and what he based his decision on, he looks at the city budget and says, well, the city budget is still only a dozen people or so the city can afford it, but the rest are with AWU, and that's ratepayers, and kind of discounted that as any real financial impact on the city. But, if you're paying through your property tax or you're paying monthly through your water and sewer bill, that's the same thing to ratepayers. And this, I expect, will. I don't think they can get it under the rates immediately because they have to get it through RCA, but ultimately this will be affecting people on their rates. And so it does have a financial impact. So anyway, so for those grounds and possibly others, I recommend a no vote.
Thank you, Mr. Weddleton. And Mr. Trainee.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm going to be urging a yes vote on this. They went through the process. Both sides gave their best offer to the arbitrator. The arbitrator made the decision. Now it's up to the body. If we don't approve this, then they have the right to strike. And there is no binding arbitration for this. So let's see what happens. You turn your water on, nothing comes out of it. You flush your toilet, it doesn't go anywhere. That's not real smart. When you take a look at what's this going to cost voters or ratepayers, because it's not tax stars rate, there's no impact at all for 2017. In 2018, we're talking about 95 cents to $1 per month increase. That's all it would be. And quite frankly, it's an essential service when you go to hit your water or you send the water out to make sure it gets where it's going. Now, they may not strike, but it gives them the ability if we don't approve this. That's the reason I intend to support this, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Trainee. Mr. Dunbar.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is one of those times where I wish I could see who else on the body is in the queue, because I know there are other members of the body who have more experience with these kind of negotiations than I do, and I'd love to hear their thoughts. I am still undecided, and I read through this as well, and I think both Mr. Weddleton and Mr. Trainee have good points. I tend to lean more towards Mr. Trainee because we went to arbitration and lost, which typically in litigation, but I only know it from the private corporate side when we go to litigation. So if there is someone else who could offer some more insight into how this process works and how we got here, I'd like to hear it. It's not a small thing to go to an arbitrator and then lose. It generally means that the other side has a strong case. And I believe that the arbitrator accepted a number of our conditions, but we lost on one of them. So, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dunbar. Mr. Steele.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm kind of with Mr. Dunbar on this. The pay raises, the annual pay raises are modest, to say the least. And the item that we lost on was comparable salaries in industry. They failed to keep pace with inflation in past years, and this would bring them up to comparable rates in the industry, so that they're being paid just like everybody else. And then the increases for the next 3 years are going to be very modest. It's a large amount, but it just means that they've suffered over the last 5 years or whatever it is, and not kept pace with the industry. So I will be a yes vote.
Thank you, Mr. Steele. Mr. Evans.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It is a difficult case for a lot of reasons. Just generally regarding the process, public sector employees that are not safety-sensitive positions have this ability to take matters to non-binding arbitration, and the whole process, it's like a two-phase process. There's fact-finding and then there's the actual arbitration. Sometimes they get kind of blurred together. But the bottom line for our purposes is that at some point a neutral, in this case it was Mr. Peterson, a very well-respected lawyer in town, had the decision as to whether to accept the city's offer as on a number of different issues or accept the union's offer. And at that point, he can't blend them. It has to be all one or the other. And he can do it for each issue. So there were some issues he picked for the city and some issues he picked for the union. And the one he picked for the union was the compensation piece. And the compensation piece in this particular matter is a little problematic, at least problematic for me, because it does, as Mr. Steele was saying, contain what can be described as fairly modest annual increases. It's the same amount that we just approved for the IBEW contract last week. It's 1.5 per year. But it also has this 5% kind of kicker, the part that Mr. Steele was talking about, to try to bring the bargaining unit members up to what are believed to be comparable. And I don't doubt, I read the previous arbitration decision from arbitrator Serdaley, who ruled in favor of the union back, several years ago, along the same lines. And then at that time, we didn't approve it. It didn't get implemented, and we went with the city's offer. So to the union's credit, they've been playing the game appropriately. They haven't been striking. In Mr. Peterson's arbitration decision, he even particularly notes that the parties seem to get along, despite this dispute between them. The parties have been very cooperative in the process. It hasn't been, antagonistic. It's been very professional. So they certainly deserve credit for that. The hard part, again, is the timing. I voted last week against approving the more modest IBEW contract, which was only 1.5%, didn't have the 5% kind of kicker thing. So personally, I have a difficult time approving this, even though I have, certain regard for how they've gone through the process. To Mr. Trainey's point, though, I do want to say that we shouldn't hold that process to be the end result. The arbitrator looks at things, kind of tries to be fair and balanced, looks at comparables, but there's a reason that the statute allows the assembly to be the final vote on that, because the arbitrator isn't responsible for all the various priorities of the municipality. He doesn't have to concern himself about, what we're going to pay, how we're going to pay for the SAP program, or how we're going to get the port done. Our job is to weigh those various priorities along with this decision, and sometimes even though the arbitrator is right necessarily on the law, we're not going to agree with him because we have other responsibilities that we have to be mindful of with those funds. That being said, I'm going to personally be, as I informed the union, a no vote. But it is a close call, I think, and I don't think there is necessarily a right or wrong answer. We do, at some point, have to make sure that, these employees are kind of brought up to comparable standards, I think. At a time when we had more money would be a better time to do it. But having said that, also, you have to be very kind of suspicious of comparables. In the private sector, just because, they're making more money down at the body shop down the street doesn't mean I get to tell my boss, now you have to give me a raise to make it the same. So I think I've talked enough. If there's any questions about the process, I'll be glad to answer them too, but I think I've covered everything. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. Mr. Falsey?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to make one procedural clarification. Item 9D13 was pulled from the consent agenda. That was the memorandum transmitting the arbitrator's decision. The action before the Assembly is whether to approve the arbitrator's decision, and so I thought I would clarify that I understood the import of Assemblymember Weddleton's motion to be a motion to approve the arbitrator's decision rather than the memorandum itself.
Of course.
Thank you, Mr. Falsey. And it says consideration of the arbitrator's decision. But anyway, you're the attorney, I'm not. Thank you. Mr. Weddleton.
Oh, I think we're good. Okay, I just wanted, sorry to bite the apple again, I guess, but regarding Mr. Evans on the 5% kicker thing that was involved here, when you can read in the report, one big issue is that over a variety of different work or job categories or descriptions, some were fairly close to what they found to be market, others were substantially different from their comparables and so on. And the cure was to go 5% across the board increase, which really didn't resolve the problem, which is this vast difference amongst a bunch of job categories. And my understanding is that there is a process in place right now that they've started looking at reclassifying all the various jobs. And that really gets to my understanding of the main issue of the employees at the water utility is to get those squared up. And I think it's a better process to really do that rather than this 5% kicker. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Weddleton. Mr. Trainey.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for letting me speak again. Appreciate it. I've sat through a lot of these over the years. And quite frankly, in this case, the administration won on a lot of items and lost on this one. But, we have to take into account where the city's going, tax-wise, ratepayer-wise. This doesn't affect everybody in Anchorage. Some people are on well water, some people are on septic. This does affect ratepayers. And it makes sense to approve this one. Thank you, Madam Chair. It was a good process.
Thank you, Mr. Trainee. Mr. Evans.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just had actually a question, I think, for Mr. Falsey, because I'm not sure of the process myself. If the Assembly rejects the memorandum here for the arbitrator's decision, is the result that the city can then put its last best offer into place? Or is that what would happen here?
Through the chair, that is functionally correct. There may be a little bit of a delay before that action could occur, but the code reads as follows. The decision of the arbitrator shall be final and binding upon the parties after approval by 8 votes of the Assembly. If the arbitrator's decision is not approved by the Assembly within 21 days after delivery to the municipal clerk, or 7 days following the receipt of the municipality's financial analysis, whichever is later, the parties shall then be considered at an impasse. The municipality may then implement its last best offer, and the affected bargaining unit may exercise its right to strike.
And thank you, Mr. Falsey. And I think that's important for the body to understand, too, is that if this body rejects the memorandum, the likely result, that it's going to depend on what the administration does then, but is that the bargaining unit would get, because the last best offer the administration made, as I understand it, was the 1.5 increases across the board. So that probably would still be given to the bargaining unit, even if we reject this, just so you know that.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. There is no one else in the queue. Please vote. We're voting, as Mr. Falsey said, on whether or not to accept the arbitrator's decision submitted behind this Assembly memorandum. Please vote. Somebody didn't. That item fails. Mr. Trainee, I need a motion to take a recess until 6 o'clock.
Move to take a recess until 6 o'clock, Madam Chair.
May I have a second, please? Thank you. We have the recess, folks. So anyway, we're recessed until 6 o'clock.
Lisa, tell me who voted how on that one, would you?
Project Citizen project regarding tiny homes as a way to address homelessness. Are students here? Hello, please come to the podium and state your name and spell your last. Welcome.
Hello. Good evening, Anchorage Assembly members. I am Mia Green, and this is Seneca Slocum. We are here representing Greening Middle School in our social studies class in Project Citizen. Project Citizen is a curricular program that promotes competent and responsible participation in local and state government. The program helps participants learn how to monitor and influence public policy. We chose to focus on homelessness. After months of researching the topic and the policies surrounding it, we decided that Anchorage could utilize tiny homes for the chronically homeless in Anchorage in the future. There are already many places successfully using the tiny housing, including Newfield, New York, Detroit, Michigan, Syracuse, New York, Nashville, Tennessee, and Seattle, Washington.
We were looking into the prospect of building the tiny homes when we realized that the current land use and zoning laws would not allow this. Title 21 addresses zoning ordinance, and as of now, tiny homes are only allowed in the R-5 zone. Title 23 is focused on building safety codes. Title 23 is an obstacle, but it can be avoided if the house is on a movable trailer instead of a foundation. The biggest opposition from residents might be that the traffic density would increase in residential areas, but the prospect of more housing options could disband the dislike. Residential homes require access to emergency services, sewer, and water, and so would tiny homes. Mr. Terry Schoenthal, the manager of the planning division of the municipality of Anchorage, came to our class and supports our proposal. He said that the homeless have already started to move into the light industrial zones, such as downtown Ship Creek area. The light industrial zone in Title 21 could be altered as a testing ground and be a place to allow these tiny homes initially.
Aside from being a potential solution for chronic homelessness, this would allow Anchorage residents more choice for housing. Anchorage is missing dense, low-cost housing. In fact, Anchorage has a very limited housing stock. We are asking you to alter Title 21 to allow tiny homes and provide more zones for tiny homes to be located. We respectfully request your immediate action, and thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Don't go away. There are some questions or comments. Mr. Flynn?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Is Mr. Doherty with you tonight?
He is not, but he's in our classes at school, so.
I sort of suspected since he sent me a letter.
Yeah.
I sent him one back yesterday.
Yep, he received it today, so.
I've got an extra copy if you want it.
Okay.
I think the tiny homes idea is a good concept. I think your idea of placing them in the Ship Creek area is a bad one.
Okay.
And the reason is Northwest Anchorage already has a disproportionate amount of services and housing for the homeless community, and the residents of the area are reticent to accept additional services and housing in their area. My suggestion to you, and Ms. Domboski may want to talk about this more, was that you meet with representatives from Eklutna, which we have authorized or are about to authorize a large settlement with, so that they can expand their housing stock in the Eagle River area.
Okay.
And it would be a nice test bed in that it is naked land, and therefore, to the extent, if they are willing, and if the local representatives are willing to amend their discrete portion, their discrete chapter within Title 21, it would be a much easier experiment to test if there is a unanimity, I wouldn't say unanimity, I'll say a general feeling that it would be worth trying. So that was my suggestion to Mr. Doherty. I have an extra copy of the letter with me if you'd like it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Flynn. Ms. Domboski?
Thank you. Ladies, I'm over here. I want to thank you for coming tonight and bring this issue up. I represent your district, which is Chugach Eagle River, as does Mr. Starr, who is not here tonight. Have you, during your discussions, did you talk about anything called granny pods?
I don't think
So what it is, and that's actually what they call it, but what it is for people who potentially might want to bring a senior citizen, a aging parent or grandparent on their property. It's a very small, tiny home, basically. That's one level that you put on the same lot as a primary dwelling. And I think Title 21 is prohibitive because of setbacks and other things, but this is a concept, especially as we have aging populations. A lot of people want their parents and grandparents near them so they can help them, but have them still live, on their own independently in their own little place. So I think your concept of tiny homes, it is something that's sweeping the nation, right? I think your concept is a very good one, but I think we could broaden it as well. So what I'm giving you homework. So there's something in Eagle River. We have our own chapter within Title 21, specifically for land use in Chugach Eagle River. And we have an advisory board that weighs in on any changes to our chapter. Have you heard of the Chugach Eagle River Advisory Board? Have you been to it yet?
No.
Okay. So you're going to want to call the chair or one of the vice chairs, Debbie Osander or Carl von Lerte, and I will give you their phone numbers. And you're going to want to go and talk to this board, because if we're going to get Chapter 10 amended, we're going to have to get this board on board with the idea. But it's a great place to start. And essentially, it's a board made up of all the community councils, one representative from each community council in Chugach Eagle River. And they really weigh in when we have big issues like changing Chapter 10 on the community discussion and how we tailor those changes to fit the community. So I'll come down there when you guys are done, and I'll give you those contact numbers, okay? But great presentation and great idea.
Thank you, Ms. Dombrowski. Mr. Starr, are you on the line? Mr. Starr?
Yes, I am.
Excellent. Thank you, Mr. Starr. Mr. Dunbar?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll keep my remarks and question brief because I think that my colleagues just addressed most of what I wanted to say. This is a great idea and a great concept, and I'm glad you looked into it. Another word for what Mr. Bossi was just saying is an ADU, an additional dwelling unit. They're also called mother-in-law apartments. And I think this idea of doing tiny homes and mother-in-law apartments scattered throughout the community is a really good one, and something that, frankly, we're going to be looking at on this body. ADUs are allowed under the current version of Title 21, but there are some challenges to doing them. But I think what Mr. Flynn was getting at, which I also agree with, is the idea of concentrating these things in one area, whether it's Ship Creek or wherever else it is. And I'm sure you're familiar. Actually, I want to ask you, when you were researching this, did you look at the case of the valley, the Mat-Su Valley, where I believe they recently either considered or did ban these things because of the concentration? Did you look at that at all?
I personally didn't come across it.
I didn't see it either.
So I don't think we should go that route, but I think the reason they did that is because they had certain stigma attached with the concentration of the tiny homes. But again, I just want to commend you on this work. It's cutting edge, and it's exactly the kind of thing we need to do here in Anchorage. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dunbar. Mr. Evans?
Thank you, Madam Chair. You are middle school students?
Yes.
Wow, that was a great presentation. I think it is a very interesting idea. I think there is definitely merit in it. The details, I think, are yet to be worked out. But I was able to sit on a number of committee meetings when they were finalizing Title 21, and I heard a great deal of presentations that weren't nearly as coherent and well presented as you just did. So good job.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. Mr. Weddleton?
I spent 5 years living in tiny houses in Fairbanks. I always did have electricity, and it was actually a wonderful time. One of the things you're starting to hear, one of the pushback things on these tiny homes, which I think are wonderful, and usually people in those live in low budget and they want to keep it that way, so maybe they don't have a car, they want to be where there's bus service. So if you want to be where there's really good, reliable bus service, you are in Northwest Anchorage, because there's no buses up north of town, and South Anchorage will soon be cut off. So that forces that concentration into that part of town where you've just been rebuffed. So that is the battle in these things. The concept, building by building, is fine, but where are you going to put them? And that's going to be a challenge. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Weddleton. You did a wonderful job. Your presentation was excellent. Thank you so much for being here this evening.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Agenda item 12B, Gruning Middle School students to address their Project Citizen project regarding current number of APD officers in Anchorage. Good evening. Please state your name.
Delaney Hanna.
Sierra Enda.
Ethaniel Padilla.
And Joshua Forsyth.
Good
Good evening, Assembly members. We are students from Gruening Middle School in Eagle River representing our social studies class. My name is Sierra Enda, and my classmates, Delaney, Josh, and Nathaniel. Our class is participating in Project Citizen, which is a national civics competition that teaches students how to influence public policy. Our class chose to focus our project on our community's rising crime rate. We have been researching this problem and speaking with members of our community since October. We are here to present an idea that we believe will help impact the rise in crime.
Can you pull the mic when you're talking closer so that we can hear you a little bit better? Thank you.
According to Alaska Dispatch News, in the past 5 years, crimes like murder, sexual assault, robbery, and vehicle theft have increased by 68%. Anchorage has experienced 31 homicides in 2010, and by 2015, this number increased to 59. In 2010, there were 1,619 vehicle thefts, and in 2015, our community saw 2,046 vehicle thefts. Also, according to the FBI crime statistics, in 2015, the national violent crime rate was estimated to be 372.6 offenses per 100,000 citizens. Anchorage has had a violent crime rate of 635.8 per 100,000 citizens in 2015. This means that Anchorage's violent crime rate is 70% higher than the national average. We believe this is unacceptable. The Assembly needs to take action to show our community it is working to make our community a safe place.
Statistics such as these demonstrate a huge burden facing our police. Police are forced to address the rising crime, increase violence, and maintain city ordinances, all with low resources and time. In the United States, on average, there are 2.7 officers for every 1,000 citizens. In Anchorage, on average, we fall short of that and have only 1.2 officers for every 1,000 citizens. Unless we are able to address this discrepancy in officers, able to protect our streets and our families, we are going to continue to see a rise in crime. Our police and our dispatch are constantly on response to calls. They are unable to do proactive policing. The APD is also faced with normal police attrition, which further contributes to the low numbers of police available.
It is our recommendation that this Assembly should pass an ordinance requiring our city to meet the national average of police officers to citizens. This might be drafted as a future goal for our budget, but it is our belief that this Assembly and those on it should be known as leaders, holding our city to a higher standard in the future. Thank you for your time and your consideration.
Thank you very much. Mr. Trainee?
Thank you, ma'am. We've been doing that, trying to rebuild the police force. Under the last administration, there were not enough officers. We tried to have academies. The last mayor vetoed them. With this mayor now, we're adding more academies. Right now, we're at 413 officers. We probably need to add another 80 or 90 to get where we want to go, but we're going to get there. And it takes tax dollars to do it. So that's one problem we have, is a lack of declining dollars. We have to put every dollar we have towards police and fire to get it built back up again. But thanks for being here, because we agree with you guys. We need to have a safe town, and that requires a police force that does more than just respond to problems, that's out there looking to see how they can curb these problems from happening. But thanks for being here.
Thank you, Mr. Trainee. Mr. Evans?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Your idea is obviously such a good idea that the mayor has already thought of it, so it's you're working on the right track. Good presentation. I don't know what happened to middle school when I was in middle school. Keeping my shoes tied was about as good as I can get, and that was kind of iffy. So we're dealing with the school district's budget next meeting. So you were a good thing to see. Thank you. Or credit to your school.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. Mr. Peterson?
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. And I want to thank you for coming and making this presentation to us tonight. You did an excellent job. And you look good, too. So it's always important. we have been trying to rebuild the police force. We did invest in 2 police academies last year, and we have one ongoing now, and another one will be starting on June 19th, I believe is the plan. So that we're hoping by this time next year, we have approximately 420 to 430 officers, depending on retirements. We may not be up to the ratio that you were quoting, but we're headed in the right direction. I just wanted to reassure you that we know that public safety has to be a top priority. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. Mr. Weddleton.
I appreciate the statistics, and you mentioned the national average for police and per 100,000, and that could apply in many cities, but not here because our police are so far above average, we don't need that many.
Thank you, Mr. Weddleton. Mr. Dunbar.
Thank you, Mr. Weddleton. And thank you guys. I think from that presentation you must have spoken with people on the police force or with the chief or maybe with representatives of the police union, because you certainly represented that case very well. So one of the challenges we have here is recruiting and retaining officers. And I've often thought about why it is that we've had that difficulty, and the number of people applying for our police academy is a lot lower than it used to be. And I was wondering if you guys in your research had learned anything about that, or if you or any of your friends dreams about becoming a police officer. So Mr. Evans didn't mention it, but he was a police officer at one time. But when I was growing up, it just never occurred to me. And I was wondering if it ever occurred to any of you or any of your friends that you knew, or that you know.
I don't know about the rest of them, but it has to me.
Really? Wonderful. Why do you think that is? Anyone else want to speak?
Well, I think because everyone wants to try to do good at least once in their community. So I think being a police officer is like one way everyone's thought of doing good in their community.
Well, from your mouth to God's ears. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dunbar. Ms. Dombrowski.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I just want to point out to Mr. Evans, the kids that come through Gruning are incredibly bright and talented and good-looking and wise. And oh, did I say I went there too?
Yes, I know you did, Amy.
So I think it was a fantastic presentation, and I was listening to the beginning part of it from the back, so I want to make sure I didn't miss it. When you were talking about the statistics and the trending or across the nation, did you look back at Anchorage specifically year over year and look at the correlation, the connection between how many officers we had, say, 10 years ago versus the crime rates you're looking at today? Did you look at those numbers, or did you just look at like the current national average in crime?
We looked over at the past years, but we didn't exactly think it would have been as important as the main years that had the highest amounts.
So here's another, see, I love giving homework assignments. Here's another homework assignment. We actually, over the last even 5 years, over the last 10 years, our crime rate actually with lower number of officers actually dipped down. And now it's raising back up, even though we're adding officers. And I think the crime rate was going up before we started adding. So this is an interesting point of discussion that you should have in your class, too, because when you're looking at statistics, if you only look at one piece of the pie, you're missing the other part of the story. So one of the things you should look at is go back over the past 7 years. And the statistics you quote with certain types of crime, go back and look at them over the past 7 years, but also look at the number of officers we had. Because I would submit to you, it's not just how many you have, but it's how you deploy those resources. A critical component with some of policing is, for example, we get rid of a gang unit. Well, nobody's investigating gang crimes, or you don't have an intense look at that. And then we have a huge influx of gang crimes. Do you see? Or if we take people away from specific units like property crimes or theft crimes and we put them into patrol, well, then we don't have officers investigating maybe crime rings that are burglary rings. So I can tell you in the municipality of Anchorage, it's not just about the number of officers we have. It's also about how we deploy our resources. So that'll be a great exercise for you, because you can talk to the police chief and they can give you data on how many officers, for example, were in the theft burglary unit over the past few years, and how many were in the gang unit over the past few years, and you'll see interesting little trends in crime. So I think it'll be a great little tweak to how you already are looking at it now, I think it might add something to the conversation. Great presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dombowski. Mr. Croft?
Yeah, and be careful with that. I worked for 2 years in the prosecutor's office. In some sorts of crimes are going to happen to be reported anyway. But some, the more police officers you have, the more of those you're going to find. Drunk driving, we prosecuted a lot of. And if you don't have officers on the street, you just don't find those people. So the crime rate is a function of both how many offenses are being done out there and how many we catch. And without sufficient officers, your crime rate might go down in terms of prosecutions, but the criminal activity is just out there not getting caught. So it's not a straight one-for-one. I really appreciate the result you've come to and the way you've presented. If we doubled the number of officers, it would cost on the order of $100 million. And our entire budget is about $500 million and capped by a tax cap. So as you develop this, I would love your ideas on how we fund that. Not being facetious, I really would. Because you may be able, very likely, to think of things that I've missed. But I don't know that we can get to doubling. I would like to increase it, but every time we increase it with a fixed tax cap, we put more pressure on everything from snow plowing to the library. And to hire 10 new cops but close down the library, it may be a prioritization we're going to have to consider, but it's sad, right, that you have to stop doing another good thing in order to do this. So anything you can help with on that, I'd appreciate. Thank you for your presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Croft. And again, I want to thank the other students and this group of students for doing such a wonderful job. You were really pretty amazing. And Ms. Dombowski's right. You are all incredibly bright and really good looking. We want to just give you a hand for doing such a great job. Thank you. Agenda item 12C, Mr. Weddleton did such a great job having a conversation with Mr. Beardsley that Mr. Beardsley withdrew his request, so he's not here this evening. We are now at agenda item 14A, AO 2017-37, an ordinance of the Anchorage Municipal Assembly submitted to the qualified voters residing within Girdwood Valley Service Area at a special election to be held concurrently with regular municipal election on April 4th, 2017, a ballot proposition to extend the boundaries of the Girdwood Valley Service Area to incorporate several Heritage Land Bank parcels. Public hearing is now open. Anyone wish to be heard? Anyone at all? Hearing and seeing none. Public hearing is now closed. What is the wish of the body?
Move to approve.
Second.
Thank you. There is no one in the queue. Please vote. Mr. Starr?
Yes.
That item is approved. We are now at agenda item 14B, AO 2017-38, a ballot proposition to create a Turnagain Armed Police Service Area with the power to provide for police services at the sole expense of the Turnagain Armed Police Service Area. Public hearing is now open. Anyone wish to be heard?
Make sure you get in there.
Good evening.
Thank you for the opportunity to address the Assembly. My name is Wendy Wolf, and I speak on behalf of the Turnagain Armed Community Council. We represent the communities of Rainbow, Indian, and Bird Creek. The Council has been discussing policing issues on the Turnagain Arm and the Seward Highway since September 2015, after we learned that the Alaska State Troopers were closing their Girdwood office. We held a special meeting on February 16th, 2017, to discuss proposed language in Assembly Ordinance 2017-38. At that meeting, the Council approved a resolution asking the Assembly to hold a special election to allow residents to vote on the proposed ordinance, but requested that the ordinance clarify that incidents on the Seward Highway are to be excluded from the Turnagain Armed Police Service Area. reference our letter of February 17th, 2017. Residents within the Turnagain Arm Community Council area have expressed concerns that tax funds collected under the TAPSA would be used for accident response on the Seward Highway. For example, if an APD officer is en route to or already on call in one of our communities, paying for police response on the Seward Highway is a separate issue. This ordinance is addressing police response within our communities. It is not about collecting taxes to pay for APD to respond to accidents on the Seward Highway. The Council requests that the current language in proposed Ordinance 2017-38S be amended to clarify that funds will not be used to respond to accidents on the Seward Highway, lines 27 and 28. If this ordinance passes, TAPSA funds should not be used to pay for responding to or clearing accidents on the Seward Highway. Another funding source needs to be found or created to cover APD or the Alaska State Troopers to respond to the Seward Highway. Our community continues to be concerned about coverage on the Seward Highway, and we urge the municipality and the state of Alaska to find a solution. Thank you.
Thank you. There are no questions. Thank you very much. Anyone else wish to be heard? Good evening.
Good evening. My name is Tommy O'Malley. I was on the Girdwood Board of Supervisors when we found out that the Alaska State Troopers were forced to abandon their post and their protection for the citizens along Turnagain Arm by poor judgment by our Alaska State Legislature. I was also the supervisor in charge of public safety at that time, and I was the co-chair of the Girdwood Public Safety Task Force. So although I don't look like a law and order kind of a guy, I am. We had, the first thing that we did was to appeal to our legislators, because this crisis that we're dealing with tonight was caused by the legislature not funding essential services that protect people in Alaska. We got no response from Kathy Giesel, nothing, and haven't yet. And I think this is where the focus needs to happen with our state legislature. The Alaska State Troopers are sincere in their frustration that they have to abandon protection for people along Turnagain Arm, but they're like triage nurses in an emergency room. There's blood flowing out in the villages, and they need to go there. In our deliberations that have led us to having our own police department, we've had 13 public meetings and countless private meetings and meetings to find out information. They resulted in a resolution that we were not allowed to support because we couldn't use any resources of the city to, or taxpayer resources to push this resolution. I spent 6 Saturday mornings with Trooper Mike out in front of the post office trying to convince people to vote for our resolution for police. At the time of the election, 819 people voted, which was some kind of record, and the vote was carried by 3 votes out of 819. I think you guys should be ready for this ordinance that you're passing for the resolution to be on the ballot. I think you should be ready for failure. As we work toward the contract, and Bill Falsey helped out on this, I learned something called force majeure. And on a boilerplate contract, this is thrown in there because force majeure is like an act of God. And on a bad snow day, none of us have to show up, but the essential services people have to show up.
Thank you very much, sir. Mr. Peterson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Tommy, do you have additional comments you'd like to make?
I do.
Thank you. Continue, please.
Thank you. The idea of force majeure is that the essential people, and that is our public safety people, our fire department, and our police departments, they're the ones, while we get to take the day off, they're the ones that come online. They're the ones that deal with public safety. Again, public safety has been cut by our legislatures, and the onus has been put on common people like me and Wendy Wolf, who have to face the disruption in our communities of half of the people voting against you, all right? Where's Kathy Giesel in here, all right? We need to focus on the legislature, and any power that you guys have needs to be focused there. It is an essential service. And what if the vote goes no? I predict that it will go no, because you've talked to the Turnagain Arm Community Council, and that's Rainbow Bird and Indian. That's not Crow Creek Road, and that's not Portage. I've talked to all of those people. I almost got in a fight in a bar in Bird Creek just bringing it up. Guy said, you can have my guns, but I'm going to give you all my bullets first. It's like, what? We're not talking about that. We're talking about police protection for vulnerable people. Yikes, I got out of there. Like a toddler or a teenager, they're going to tell you no, no, no. And as a parent or as the representative body, you aren't allowed to give up your responsibility. So if they vote no, you're still going to be responsible, but you're not really. The state legislature is responsible for what has happened here, both in Girdwood and in Anchorage. One more thing. When we tried to find a solution for our police problem, we found a unique solution in hiring the Whittier Police, and they have been wonderful. The option of having the Anchorage Police Department respond was shot down by Mike Abbott, who said, we don't have the police even if you could afford them. This solution that you guys have come up with, or somebody has come up with, draws on a non-existent resource. You don't have the police to give to this problem if it does pass. And it doesn't, this thing doesn't address the Seward Highway safety, which is everybody's concern on the Kenai
Thank you.
Peninsula.
Mr. Weddleton has a question.
Just a little feedback for you. You and Wendy and Janet and Tyler are not just average people. You're very special leaders in your communities. And when people see you at the Forest Fair in your kilt, you do look like a law and order kind of guy. Anyway,
I
I'm
let
more
my hair
optimistic
down,
on this.
too.
I think Turnagain Arm and the Crow Creek communities have understood that there is a real issue, and this is a very gentle preparation for when they need services.
This is a preparation for what's going to happen all over Alaska as our legislature abandons us. And the heat is put on people like me, or Wendy, or other people. And it's not that it's not fair, we stepped up, but the cause of the problem is the state legislature. That's who we need to get after.
Anything else, Mr. Weddleton?
No, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Weddleton. Mr. Bosky?
Thank you, Mr. O'Malley, for coming. I always enjoy listening to you because I know you have a pulse on your community, and I appreciate the perspective. Have you had any discussions with the governor's office since the troopers are under the governor?
We, on the Girdwood Board of Supervisors, we had no response, and our appeal for help is a matter of record. It's on our website. It was a resolution passed by the Girdwood Board of Supervisors.
Right, and I would say we have a very strong executive branch or executive form of government in the city and in the state. And, if the governor wanted to prioritize this, I think he certainly could do that through his Commissioner of Public Safety. So I would think he would have a lot more pull than one state senator, though I think they both represent you and they both should be responding to Girdwood. So we appreciate you coming forward, but That's the area I would push really hard, is the governor's office and Commissioner Monaghan.
And we have.
Thank you.
And
I have no doubt.
we were abandoned, and we did it on our own self. I don't know what kind of police force you would get with the $50,000 that you're going to throw at this. I mean, knowing as much as I know about the cost of police and adjudication, because it's not just police, it's the whole court system and the Department of Corrections. You can't raise very much money from tax section 15. It's not evaluated very highly.
No, I think you're right. I think you're right. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Domboski. Thank you, Mr. O'Malley, for your service to your community also. Anyone else wish to be heard? Good evening.
Hi, my name's Ed Larrivee, L-A-R-R-I-V, Victory E-2. This isn't going to pass. We're scared to death of our taxes going up. And right now, people feel like they've taken that power from the cops and brought it to their own selves, like my neighbors have. They're armed to the teeth. And guess what? It works. The crime went down. They go out on their balcony and they smoke a cigarette and they got a big old Glock on them. I'm looking at them, I'm saying, well, that's kind of scary. And then I said, wait a minute, he's been trained. That's what a lot of people are doing. And, you know, when the crime scene goes down, they want to sell their weapon to the pawn shop. The pawn shop will buy them. You know, and it's a win-win situation there. But this is going to go down in flames because the majority of people vote in Anchorage. And that's Turnagain. It's going to go down. Now, if I suggest the people out there arm themselves to the teeth, come up with, I understood something about a lotto that the state's thinking of for teachers. Come up with something like that. But don't take it out on the taxpayer. We can't do that because people will move out of Anchorage. And best thing you can do is look at this a little bit closer and say, will people vote for it? I think not. My name's Ed Larrivee. That's what I think. Anybody have any questions?
Mr. Evans?
Yeah.
Where are you?
Thanks, Mr. Larrivee. You do understand that the people in Anchorage wouldn't get to vote on this, just the people in Turnagain-Arm area.
Oh, really? Okay. Well, if it ever comes to Anchorage, that's...
Did you read the...
A little bit. I skim things real fast.
Well, appreciate the input then. Thanks.
Okay. Have a good day.
I hear you. Thank you. Anyone else wish to be heard?
Good evening. My name is Tyler Gray. I'm a resident of Bird Creek. I just wanted to support Mr. O'Malley's statement that I feel as written, it's likely to have a lot of opposition, mostly due to the inclusion of Upper Crow Creek, who have, I think, not wanted to be involved in a police service area, as well as Portage, and as well as the inclusion of the highway in the service area. So I guess I'd like to suggest that if this does not pass, we look at revising the boundaries to more accurately dictate the smaller community areas, and maybe we can come up with a past resolution then at that time. So that's all. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Anyone else wish to be heard? Anyone at all? Hearing and seeing none, public hearing is now closed. What is the wish of the body?
Move to approve.
Thank you.
Madam Chairman, may I clarify, did he move the S version or the original version?
I'm sorry, move to approve the S version. Thank you.
Thank you. And then the second.
Second.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Flynn. Mr. Weddleton?
I'd like to offer an amendment you should have in front of you. It's fairly simple. If you go to page 892 in our packet, to lines 26 through 28, just add a few words so that it will read, funds would not be used to provide for regular patrols or regular response to accidents on the Seward Highway.
Second.
I think you already had one, I thought. Mr. Dunbar? Oh, okay. Thank you, Mr. Evans.
And just this, may I speak to that briefly then?
Thank you. Mr. Trainee?
I'll let him speak because I want to ask him some questions on this.
Okay.
So you're saying if a police officer drives by an accident, he can't stop there and give aid to the person?
He can, but the funds from this service area would not be used for that. This is for policing within the community.
In that service area, and there's an accident there, they're responding to, somebody has an accident in that area. They can't then charge them for responding? I'm trying to figure out how this is going to work.
Right. The intent here is for these funds to only be used for policing within the community. And it is more similar to, it's not like Girdwood, they set up with a contract with Whittier. It's more similar to when the police help control traffic at the Greek festival or at many running races at the big churches on Sunday morning. They're paid by the hour just for responses to kind of high-level issues within the community. It's not a solution at all for policing on the highway. That looms ahead as a very, very serious issue we are dealing with.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Trainee. Mr. Flynn?
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. I'm not going to support the amendment, and I'm not going to support the underlying ordinance. I think this is crazy. I am sure that every single one of my constituents would universally support fee-for-service. They only have to pay when they call the cops. How great would that be? But saying that one group of people within the municipality of Anchorage only has to pay when they call is unfair to every other taxpayer in Anchorage. And I appreciate the challenges that you folks are facing. I was very supportive of Girdwood as they found their own solution, and I think it's a good one. But this is unfair, and it frankly isn't going to do you any good because the resources aren't there. So I can't support the amendment. I think it's ridiculous. I can't support the underlying ordinance. I think it's unfair. And I'm sorry, Mr. Weldon. I know you're trying. You're doing your best for your constituents, but I'm sorry. Can't do it.
Thank you, Mr. Flynn. On the amendment, Mr. Dunbar, proposed amendment?
Yes. I will have comments on the underlying ordinance after the amendment. I am trying to figure out, John, why this amendment is necessary. Because the original ordinance says, unless I'm looking at a different version than I think I am, the S version says funds would not provide for regular patrols or regular response to accidents on the Seward Highway. And your amendment would change it to funds would not be used to provide. And, I'm an attorney. I read things really closely, but I can't figure out what the difference between not provide and not be used to provide.
It's one of the requests from the community. It gives them more comfort, and I would like the community to feel that this reflects their desires in every way so that we have a successful vote and support. Not just here, but on April 4th.
Thank you, Mr. Dunbar. Ms. Dombrowski on the proposed amendment.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think Mr. Flynn probably summed up some of my concerns. But when I was looking at this, I was thinking about area-wide EMS. We have area-wide EMS, and we have fire service districts. And so I'm trying to, and I remember the whole fight about troopers and APD and on the hillside before. So it doesn't seem like we're really in all that unfamiliar territory. But hey, I'm with you. If you want to go fee for service for calls, I think my constituents would love that, right? Because we pay a lot for APD, and we have 3 officers for a huge district. And let's be honest, sometimes it takes quite a long time for us to get our responses because our district's so big. So I get it, but I think when we start creating unique and very vastly different ways that we're taxing people for police service, I think it becomes challenging. And I'm just trying to find a way. I mean, if you can sell it to me, how do I sell it to my constituents when they say to me, hey, Girdwood or, Indian or wherever gets to pay by call? I've called the police, 2 times in the last 20 years. So you have to help me get over that hurdle because it's one that I'm struggling with.
Are you looking at me?
Yep. Thank you, Mr. Bosky. Mr. Weddleton is next in the queue. Mr. Weddleton.
Thanks, and I'm glad Mr. Flynn's back in here, because I think your point is our fire service is not citywide, and when they respond to the, there's no high up on the hillside, that they typically would respond, and when they do, they're going to send you a bill. So kind of fee for service for critical public safety is part of our regime here. This is a unique community. They have maybe a dozen calls a year, less than that. A few of them are serious. We're looking at domestic violence, assault and so on here, where they would be calling. And you're talking about 300 people spread out over a huge area. The needs are so different from the rest of the community. To include them is the APD just doesn't have they're not designed for this kind of policing. It doesn't work. It may be a stretch for Eagle River, but if it's a stretch for Eagle River, it's a whole solar system away for this area. So it did take some, we have to be thinking carefully, and we need to do something there. And this was the best idea we came up with, and I actually think it'll work. I think it's appropriate for the area.
So, Madam Chair, if I may follow up with a question.
Certainly, Mr. Wells.
So what I'm thinking, though, is we create, say, a fire service district, and that's a perfect example, because that's what I had in mind was like Chugiak Fire Service, right? We have the Glen Highway from North Eagle River all the way out to the Connecticut River Bridge. And they're a volunteer service. I pay taxes because I live in Peters Creek for that service. And there's never a time when there's an accident on the highway that CVFD will not respond. And they may not be transporting somebody, so you may not get a bill. And so, again, we're creating a service district where now we're saying, but we're not going to respond on the highway, even though the highway goes through the district. Am I missing something?
Well,
somebody help me, because I'm sure I am.
Yeah, well, I think what you say is essentially correct. However, what you would be asking for is these roughly 300 people to support really the busiest highway in the state, and they're not using it as much. That is constantly used by people throughout the state. That part of the highway, that is a state responsibility. They've chosen not to meet that responsibility, so it's kind of on us some way. But to dump that on the few hundred people in Turnagain Arm, that's too big a leap. They're just, they would burn through this $50,000 in one bad accident, so and you can't expect them to pay for the whole thing. It just wouldn't work.
Yeah, I think that's why I'm a huge advocate, and Girdwood's not going to hear me say this, but I'm a huge advocate for an area-wide police service district, area-wide, just like EMS, because I think then you would have the burden be shifted from all of the municipality of Anchorage and not just the residents of Girdwood or not just the residents of Indian. I think ultimately that's how we do area-wide EMS. So if we have a mass casualty in one area and a whole bunch of resources are sucked up, the burden does get spread across the entire city for the cost of those emergency services. So, when I look at this, I really think the long-term goal needs to be an area-wide police service district, which unfortunately would cost Girdwood more, but it would spread the burden out across the entire city.
Madam Chair, if I might.
Certainly, Mr. Bowden.
We have an April 1st deadline.
I know.
And that's
I know.
right there.
I know. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bosky. Mr. Evans, on the amendment?
No, it's on. We haven't actually been talking about the amendment for a long time, but I'll wait then until we get to
And I appreciate that. There is no one else in the queue. We have before us an amendment brought forward by Mr. Weddleton. Please vote on the proposed amendment. Mr. Starr?
No.
That amendment is approved. We now have before us the main motion, approval of AO 2017-38S. Mr. Evans.
Yeah, I do want to say that I understand Mr. Flynn's concerns about the fee for service, but it's also true that what the residents of this area are getting is not the same thing that the rest of Anchorage is getting. Police protection is more than just responding to police calls. Well, that's a big part of it. They're not getting patrols. The APD is not going out there and making sure their property is safe and that there's no bad guys hanging around. It's just the very barest minimum in case there is a serious crime that takes place out there. We have something in place that allows us to send our police. If this doesn't pass, what's likely to happen is that there's going to be a serious, hopefully there's not, but if there's a serious crime in this area, we're going to send the police because there's no one else who will go, and the people that are going to be paying for it are the rest of Anchorage, and the people that won't have to pay for it are the people in the community. The people in the community are at least willing to put this on a ballot to tax themselves for that eventuality. It's not the end game, I don't think, by any means. I think Ms. Domboski is right. I agree with her that really everybody in Anchorage should be in the same police service area. It's like school districts. You know, it's a service that shouldn't have exceptions. But I think until we have a better solution, and if anybody has a better solution, I'm all ears. But I do want to say while I'm on this that I do want to give a thanks out to Mr. Weddleton, Ms. Fleet Green, Mr. Falsey, and all the other people that I may not be aware of who've really worked hard these last couple months putting this together so that we have something in place for this great emergency situation. I'm a short-timer, and I just kind of viewed it from a distance, but I do appreciate them stepping forward and all the people in the community as well. So I think we have an obligation to do something, and if we do nothing here, we still get the same result, but the rest of Anchorage pays for it. And I think that's the main distinction. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. Mr. Weddleton?
I just want a couple points. This S version, the changes are intended to clarify that any unused taxes will roll over to the next year, and that the idea at this point is that $50,000 should be enough, and they could decrease their taxes if they don't use it all. So if they find that they're only using $10,000 or $15,000 a year, they would just have a lower mill rate to replenish that each year. It also clarifies that while we are initially going with the Anchorage Police Department, the premier police force in the area, that there is some potential that if they choose differently, they could find someone else to respond to the calls. And then I just want to reiterate, because it's very important to the community, Turning It On community, but also people in Anchorage, that this is not a solution for the Seward Highway. That is a very serious problem in front of us. This money is not intended for patrols of the Seward Highway or for accidents that occur on the Seward Highway. So that is another issue. And again, that this is more akin to police helping out at a race or at a festival or something than it is to true policing, as Mr. Evans pointed out. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Weddleton. Mr. Dunbar?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think Mr. Evans captured my thoughts pretty well, but I wanted to speak up because my district and Mr. Peterson's district is probably the closest in terms of demographics to Mr. Flynn's in terms of the density. And for that reason, you would think I would have some of the same concerns. I do have some of the same concerns, and I do think this is a different kind of setup. But I think we in Anchorage should be willing to at least put this solution forward. And I also agree with Ms. Domboski. I do think that in the end we will end up with a area-wide service area. I mean, a lot of these issues, like many things we deal with, are sort of a vestige from the old unification from 40 years ago, and we're still working through these issues. But I was also hoping that someone from the administration, perhaps someone from the police department or someone from the administration could speak to the hypothetical that Mr. Evans had put forward, which is, imagine we have, let's say, a woman who is in fear for her life, who is, being pursued by someone in a case of domestic violence, and she calls the Anchorage Police Department. What do we do? If she calls 911, do we send somebody if we're the closest officer to respond, or do we not if this doesn't pass? Is there anyone willing to speak to that here? The Chief of Police has left, but perhaps you, Mr. Falsey?
Mr. Falsey?
Thank you, through the chair. I think Mr. Evans is essentially correct. Currently, our code provides that any extension of services beyond the boundaries of a service area can be made in response to a public emergency on a discretionary basis, and that it has to be deemed a gratuitous extension of services, meaning that they cannot bill for it. So there certainly would be a category of emergent situations where, in the absence of AST going, no one else to catch the ball, we would almost certainly send APD, and there would be no one to pay those bills other than those who are residing in the Anchorage Bowl and Chugach Eagle River. With the $50,000 that this Turning It On police service area could raise, there may be some additional category of responses that would not rise all the way to level of an emergency that the APD could also respond to.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Falsey. And so I think that is a good illustration of what Mr. Evans is saying. So one way to look at this is to say, this is a special deal, and wouldn't it be nice if we all got this deal? Another way to look at this is, at least if they accept this, they're going to be paying something. Where on the other hand, if it doesn't pass, and this is probably going to be an argument within those 300 people or so, it's kind of like people who don't have health insurance, and then they wait until they have a catastrophic event, and they use the emergency room, and then the rest of us end up paying for it if they can't pay for it themselves. So this is actually a responsible thing for them to do, and it's an interim solution, but at least it's part of the solution. So I again, even though my district resembles Mr. Flynn's, I urge passage of this ordinance. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dunbar. Ms. Dombrowski.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I love the opportunity to have debate because it can happen. Mr. Evans has convinced me. And I think we've all, a lot of us have been saying the same thing. And I think Mr. Dunbar said it well. This is an interim solution, and I don't think it's a great one, frankly. But I think the number one thing we do is public safety, and I was on the record in a work session saying I don't care what happens on the Seward Highway. If there's an accident, we have a moral obligation to go. I don't think you can just say, oh, we're not going to respond or call somebody from Soldotna. I think that's ridiculous. So I like the idea that the representatives from this district have worked so hard to find something to try to get them over the edge and hopefully get you a Band-Aid. I don't think it's adequate. I think it is an interim solution. But I really like what you said, Mr. Evans. The point is, now that people know, if they vote this down, they're still going to get service. I don't know why they didn't vote for it, but it gives them an opportunity. And I think it's important for all of us to give the people of Indian and Bird and Portage the opportunity to say yes or no. I'm big on letting people choose their own destiny and put ballot measures in front of them, even when I don't agree with them. But in this particular case, I like the opportunity for them to at least pay a little bit of their own way when it comes to if they need police services. So I will support it, to put it on the ballot and let the people of your district decide.
Thank you, Mr. Dombrowski. Mr. Flynn.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I enjoy reading an author by the name of Pat McManus, not because he shares my first name, who writes Cautionary Tales of the Great Outdoors, and he has a very amusing short story called Temporary Measures, ways he shores up his hunting and fishing equipment while he awaits the opportunity to get the stuff he really wants, and how those temporary measures somehow become permanent. I'll remind you of the history of the Anchorage Police Service area, which did not include the hillside for the first couple of decades of Anchorage's existence, and what a brutal and ugly fight it was to extend police service to South Anchorage.
It was not brutal or ugly.
I appreciate that the people of Bird and Rainbow and Indian and Portage and up Crow Creek Road do need public safety services. But I think if we approve this, it'll be good enough. And Mr. Dunbar's and Ms. Dombrowski's dream of a area-wide police service area will be decades away, if ever, from occurring. So I'm going to continue my objection to this. I appreciate the efforts of Mr. Weddleton and others to try and come up with a solution, but that's not the answer, in my opinion.
Thank you, Mr. Flynn. Mr. Trainee.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, I appreciate my colleagues representing that area. This is not the solution to the problem. The solution to the problem is the one we put forward before with the hillside, where we brought them in the police service area. There's a state senator named Con Bundy that more than the legislature down in Juneau, Con Bundy is responsible for this problem because he changed the law so we couldn't bring him in unless it passed there and here. That's the problem here. And this is a short-term solution that's probably not going to pass the voters anyway. I'm a no vote on this, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Trainee. Mr. Peterson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I was living in South Anchorage when, if there was a crime that happened east of the Seward Highway, you had to call the troopers. And people got confused and would call APD, and they'd say, "Oh, sorry, you're out of our area," and they'd give them the trooper's number. And I heard numerous times in that period of about 8 or 10 years that I was in South Anchorage when there was no police service, people were getting really frustrated. They felt like they were falling through the cracks, and they were frustrated. They didn't know what to do, how to solve the problem. They knew there were police and troopers, and they couldn't believe that they couldn't work together to solve some of the crimes. So eventually, Hillside did get Anchorage Police Service, and it wasn't easy. I do think that we are going to see more problems like this in the future. The state is planning to slash additional funding from the budget, including the troopers' budget. There's already mention in the letter of a couple more posts across the state closing, so this may just be the tip of the iceberg, unfortunately. But I do believe that the people of this area have a right to vote to tax themselves for whatever police protection they think that this might provide, and so I'm going to be voting in favor of this to give them that opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. Mr. Evans.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a question for Mr. Trainey. If you are aware of what the solution is, and you said that solution is putting these folks into the police service area, which requires a vote of the whole city and them, why in the heck haven't you put that forward? I mean, now we're
It could change the state law, Mr. Evans. I'm not a state senator who did this one to begin with.
No, we can do it. We don't have to change state law. We have to go through the election process to do it. But why hasn't that been put on the ballot? If that's what you want.
State law, sir.
No, we can vote. We can vote. They can vote to be in this service area, and the rest of the municipality can vote to have them in the service area. It doesn't require a change of state law. I mean, a change of state law can make that process easier, I grant you. But if you believe that that is the real solution, then that should have been proposed, and we could have had a vote on that as well. But just to say that this is not the ultimate solution without proposing the solution you believe to be the legitimate solution, I think is, we are the legislative body. We can't just say, well, there's a better solution, we're not doing it, but I'm voting against this one. I just find it disingenuous. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. We need to have a citywide police force that stretches one end of the city to the other end. No donut holes in the middle.
And we don't need to stay.
Excuse me, gentlemen. Thank you very much. There is no one else in the queue. Please vote on the main motion as amended. Mr. Starr?
No.
That item is approved. We are now at agenda item 14C, AO 2732, an ordinance amending zoning map and approving the rezoning of approximately 13.7 acres from R4S1 to R4S1 with different special limitations for Ridgeport Subdivision Track 1, generally located at the northwest corner of the intersection of O'Malley Road and Lake Otis Parkway. Public hearing is now open. Anyone wish to be heard? Sir, please come to the podium. State your name, spell your last. Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you. My name is Michael Kaplan, K-A-P-L-A-N, a resident of Anchorage and Eagle River. And I'm here on behalf of Congregation Beth Shalom. And I'd like to read a letter written by our rabbi in regards to this proposal. To the Anchorage Assembly, I'm writing to express my support and enthusiasm for the senior housing project that Mr. Perry is endeavoring to complete on the corner of Lake Otis and O'Malley. Our faith community, Congregation Beth Shalom, has been involved with the Foraker pre-development program for the last couple of years, exploring opportunities that we might have to build a memory care housing facility on our campus in East Anchorage. Our project management team has completed numerous studies about the need in Anchorage and Alaska for senior housing, assisted living, and memory care, and the need is great. Right now, families seeking help often have few, if any, choices when it comes to housing options, especially as residents' need for skilled assistance grows. Mr. Perry has met with our group to give us advice and answer questions. He was incredibly giving of his time and his knowledge of the field and was incredible. Having been involved in senior housing for many years, both from the lending and development ends of the spectrum, it allowed him to have a unique vantage point when assessing how to best serve the needs of Alaskans. Mr. Perry seemed genuinely committed to the long-term success of his project. His vision and experience, along with his fondness for Alaska, will serve all of us well in the future. It is our understanding that Mr. Perry has worked closely with the Community Council and neighbors to make sure this project will be responsive to community needs. By meeting with us, he has proven his commitment to the community beyond the boundaries of his venture and helping us all solve this very difficult crisis-level issue. For all those reasons, I hope you'll vote in favor of Mr. Perry's investment this evening.
Thank you.
Sincerely, Rabbi Oblath, Congregation Beth Shalom.
Thank you. Mr. Dunbar has a question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. Kaplan. I guess I might have got confused. So I'm a member of Congregation Beth Shalom, and I'm familiar with our hope for a memory care facility there at some point. But just to be clear, we are not involved, or say you are not involved in this project. That's correct?
None whatsoever, other than Mr. Perry was kind enough to come to a meeting of our development committee and give his vast knowledge and experience, give us ideas based on what we were planning on doing, what might work, what might not work, cost assessments, those kind of things, which, again, he didn't really need to do. But we found out about his project, and he was very open and willing to come and talk to us, even though ours is a small project of 24 beds and his is a multi-aging and care type place. He's got a lot of experience, so he was able to answer a lot of questions that we had.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Dunbar. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Anyone else wish to be heard? Anyone at all? Good evening.
Good evening. Thank you.
You're welcome.
First off, I'd like to thank Terry.
Introduce yourself, please.
Oh, I'm Brandon Perry. I'm the petitioner.
Thank you.
On this zone change. First off, I'd like to thank Terry. Terry's been very helpful as we've come up to Alaska to pursue this this project, the zone changes, which was one component of that. He's been instrumental, and we're going to miss him greatly. So just want to voice my appreciation to Terry Schoenthal for his efforts. And it's been one-of-a-kind efforts in Anchorage versus other communities that we've worked with in the past. So in regards to this specific request for rezone, we're really just asking to modify some of the special limitations to allow us to build this project, which we have intended, which is a seniors continuum of care facility. It includes seniors apartments, assisted living, memory care, and independent living, and really allows seniors to age in place. They reach that retirement age. It allows them to go to one place and have care met through the end stages of their life, and not have to be ripped from the community, not have to leave South Anchorage to another location, as there are limited options there. The specific request meets all 9 of the requirements for a rezone. In addition, as mentioned previously, we have support from various community groups, including the Community Council from Abbott Loop. So I'd like to welcome any questions that any of you have. I'm all happy to take a seat and answer any questions you
Thank
have.
you.
So.
Mr. Trainee?
Sir, I understand you're going to be targeting the 65-plus group? Is that your marketing? You're going to be aiming for that crowd?
Correct.
Okay. Children there, too, or just 65 and older? I'm trying to figure out, is it just 65-plus, or is it kids, too?
It will be primarily just 65 plus. We anticipate 3 separate phases. The first phase will be a memory care and a assisted living facility of around 120, 130 units. There will also be independent living, which would have no no younger demographic. Seniors apartments typically allow some portion of folks under age 65, but it's usually at least an 80% requirement, 65 plus, on any seniors apartment project.
How many units you going to have total when it's all built out?
The exact unit count has not been defined. We've limited it to 30 density units per acre, which reflects other developments in the immediate area. And we want to be kind of in line with what that is, but the final plans have not been put together with final unit counts undefined at this point.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Trainee. There are no other questions. Thank you.
Thanks.
Mr. Peterson, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Sir, I just wanted to make sure you knew that there might be a change to bus service to that area. Were you made aware of that when you were putting this plan together?
Yes, I'm aware that currently it's a transportation corridor on Lake Otis, and that may be adjusted in the future. Yes, I am aware of that. We anticipate having our own transportation to transport our residents, at least on the assisted and independent side. It would be of benefit to maintain that transportation for the apartment residents and for employees and things like that, but we leave that up to you and your best judgment of how to best serve the community and your transportation needs.
Yeah, it might take a shuttle to shuttle them over to a bus stop or it's something like that. Anyway, I just want to make sure you're aware of that. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. Thank you, sir. Anyone else wish to be heard? Anyone at all? Hearing and seeing none, public hearing is now closed. What is the wish of the body?
Move to approve, Madam Chair.
Second.
Thank you. Mr. Weddleton.
Excuse me. I'd recommend that this be approved. I live very, very close to this thing, very familiar with it. I was the Planning Commission when we rezoned it from R7 to the current zoning, and the change in special limitations will allow a wider variety of projects to occur, and I think this would be a great project for here. But I do warn, when we do a rezone, it does not mean you get that project proposed. It's just a rezone, and that may or may not happen. But I don't find that any of the changes here really risk a bad development being there, and look forward to Mr. Perry doing what he says he would do, and it should be a great project. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Weddleton. Mr. Dunbar.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I also urge approval. At some point in the not-too-distant future, you may be seeing a similar project in East Anchorage coming before the body, although I'm not sure if they are going to need a rezone or not. I don't believe they do. So perhaps it'll be something else that brings them before the body. But it's clear that there is a tremendous need for these kind of facilities in Anchorage. And you can see it just by the fact that the petitioner spoke with Congregation Beth Shalom about a similar project, which you could see as a competitor. But the need is so great that we have this large facility, another large facility in East Anchorage, potentially another facility at Congregation Beth Shalom, and perhaps even others. And so clearly it's something we need, and I think they've done it the right way, and I urge approval. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dunbar. Mr. Trainee.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I urge approval of this. You and I have St. Mary's in our area, and they have a small housing area there for St. Mary's, for people at whatever stage of life they're in. And this is good to have this facility here for aging seniors, madam.
Thank you, Mr. Trainee.
Given his age, does he have a...
There's no one else in the queue. Please vote. That item is Mr. Starr, I'm sorry.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Starr. That item is approved unanimously. We are now at agenda item 17, audience participation. Anyone wish to be heard? Okay. Any assembly comments?
I don't think they understood what you meant.
Okay. Hello, sir. Please state your name and spell your last.
Steve Plante, Plante. Hey, I just wanted to follow up on the January discussion about fluoride and thank Assemblywoman Demboskis for her courage to bring that forward at her constituency's urging. It seems that there was a lot of confusion about fluoride, how it's delivered, whether or not it's needed, whether or not we should continue to do it. I think that Assemblyman Croft, when he asked the U.S. Public Health Service officer, what was her name, Van Pelt, is toothpaste enough? She says, yes, it is, but compliance. So does that make the Assembly an oral health authority or a governing body? I think that Ms. Dembowski's recommendation or prediction of a committee to study the harmful effects is well-founded, because we can never get information across to you in 3 minutes. It's impossible. But we could hope here to stimulate your interest that you might follow through and study the harmful effects of fluoride. There's plenty. Evans went to a lot of websites, found many studies supporting cavity reduction. Great. But if we only go to conservative or ADA-based websites, we'll never know about the dark side of fluoride. There's never been a peer-reviewed study showing fluoride to be safe for human consumption. I think that's an important point. Let's just say that it does reduce cavities, but what else does it do? I think a committee is warranted to study that. The CDC themselves said it works as a topical and only on growing teeth, so babies and adults. Does anybody even know the difference between natural fluoride and the fluoride that we're using in the water? China has outlawed fluoridated water, but they bring a lot back to us. I'd be interested in answering any questions if anybody has any. I think it's an important issue. There's still a lot of dissension. You said it yourself, Mr. Trainee, that there were less people that came to the last meeting. I think people are intimidated, and I think they're quite apathetic at this point and just disheartened that the Assembly will listen to the downside of fluoride and genuinely give that a due. And I think only a committee would allow us to follow through on that.
Thank you, sir. There are no questions. Thank you very much. Anyone else wish to be heard? Okay, any Assembly comments? Can I get a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Meeting's adjourned.